Welcome to Chalice Unitarian Universalist Congregation. We are a community of diverse beliefs and experiences, nurturing the liberal religious spirit and united by our desire to grow in love and in service. Whoever you are, whomever you love, whatever your life's journey, you are welcome here. Whether you gather with us every Sunday, once or twice a year, or are with us this morning for the first time, we are glad you are here. I'm Reverend Sharon Wylie, Chalice's minister. Our worship musician this morning is Justin Gray. Welcome to this online worship service. Welcome to those of you watching live Sunday morning using Zoom, and welcome to those of you who are watching this recording of the service later on our YouTube channel. For those of us using Zoom, please notice on your menu you have a button that says CC Live Transcript. This is Zoom's closed captioning service, and you can click on it to hide subtitle or to show the subtitle, depending on whether you want that function on or off. So you are in control of how that's working. Also on your menu is the chat button. For those of you who like to use the chat during the service, which you're welcome to do, please be sure that when you post that you use that little blue drop-down menu to select panelists and attendees. I'm the only panelist, so if you only post to me, I may not see it during the service. And we want to use chat for everyone to see everybody's posts. So let's all give ourselves a big hug of hello and welcome. If you share space with someone who wants a hug or you want to hug, now's a good time for that too. Happy Mother's Day to the mothers among us. And a special hug for those of us for whom Mother's Day is a tender time. Those of us who have lost our mothers, those who would like to be mothers but are not, and those who have difficult relationships with mothers or mothers with their children. So it can be a complicated day. And finally, I want to especially welcome those of you who are newcomers at Chalice this morning. Towards the end of the service, I will post a link in the chat box for you to follow to add your name to our email list. Our weekly email is the best way to get information about the many online groups and activities we are offering using Zoom. And once you're on our email list, you will receive information about our monthly gathering for newcomers. Now, let's take a breath together. We begin our service by acknowledging that wherever each of us is watching, if we are in what is now called the United States, then we are on land that has been stolen from indigenous peoples. Our congregational home in what is now called Escondido is on land that is part of the traditional territories of the 12 bands of the Kumeyaay Nation and the 7 bands of the Payamkasham, also called Luiseno. Land that is sacred to us now was stolen from people for whom that land was and is still sacred. In recognition that we are beneficiaries of a history of colonization, we have made financial donations in the past year to 2 local indigenous-led organizations, California Indian Legal Services and the Kumeyaay Diegueño Land Conservancy. It is our hope at Chalice to find our way to right relationship with local tribes. Now, we light our chalice, the symbol of our Unitarian Universalist faith. The flaming chalice was first used during World War II by the Unitarian Service Committee as a symbol of life-saving refuge for people fleeing persecution in Europe. May our chalice flame burn brightly, that all who are seeking may find us. The words of our call to worship come from the Reverend Elizabeth Mount. From our very first breath, we reach out. Co-regulation, not self-regulation, is in our nature. We find our cues from the sun and the moon. From each parent and caregiver, we find our place on this great turning planet by turning to one another. Generation to generation, we awaken to the dawn and fall asleep at the evening's end. Our life's journey is part of something greater, something simple, something divine. A flame cannot be lit without a spark. A life cannot begin without the air, and we cannot begin to find ourselves without love. May we reach out to one another. May we offer love and nurturing care. May we join together in celebration of the interdependence of our lives. In this spirit, we worship together. Please join in singing.
Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? Where do we come from? Mystery, mystery, life is a riddle and a mystery. Mystery, mystery, life is a riddle and a mystery. Where do we come from? Where are we going? Where do we come from? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? Mystery. Life is a riddle and a mystery. 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 Life is a riddle and a mystery. 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 Life is a riddle and a mystery. 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 Life is a riddle and a mystery.
Where do we come from? Where are we going? Where do we come from? Where are we going? Where do we come from? Where are we going?
Where do we come from?
Mystery.
What are we?
Life is a
Where are
riddle
we
and a
going?
mystery.
Our Sunday worship is the shared spiritual practice of our community, and we tend to the congregation during this time by honoring our joys and sorrows. If you would like to share a joy or sorrow with the congregation this morning, now is the time for sharing in the chat box. These won't be recorded and spoken aloud. If you'd like to send me a confidential note about your joy or sorrow, or if you'd like to arrange a time to meet with me, you can use my email, and I'll put my email in the chat box.
Such is life. Such is life. Such is peace. Such is peace. Such is spirit. Such is spirit. Such is love. Such is love. All this joy. All this joy. All this sorrow. All this sorrow. All this pride. All this pain. All this pain. Such is love. Such is life. Such is peace. Such is peace. Such is spirit. Such is spirit. Such is love. Such is love. All this joy. All this joy. All this sorrow. All this sorrow. All this pride. All this pride. All this pain. All this pain. Such is life. Such is life. Such is peace. Such is peace. Such is spirit. Such is spirit. Such is love. Such is love. All this joy. All this joy. All this sorrow. All this sorrow. All this pride. All this pain. All this pain. Such is life. Such is life. Such is peace. Such is peace. Such is spirit. Such is spirit. Such is love. Such is love.
Our story is called The Keeping Quilt, written and illustrated by Patricia Polacco. When my great-grandma Anna came to America, she wore the same thick overcoat and big boots she had worn for farm work. But her family weren't dirt farmers anymore. In New York City, her father's work was hauling things on a wagon, and the rest of the family made artificial flowers all day. Everyone was in a hurry, and it was so crowded, not like back home Russia. But all the same, it was their home, and most of their neighbors were just like them. When Anna went to school, English sounded to her like pebbles dropping into shallow water. Shh, shh, shh. In 6 months, she was speaking English. Her parents almost never learned, so she spoke English for them, too. The only things she had left of back home Russia were her dress and babushka she liked to throw up into the air when she was dancing. And her dress was getting too small. After her mother had sewn her a new one, she took her old dress and babushka. Then from a basket of old clothes, she took Uncle Vladimir's shirt, Aunt Havala's nightdress, and an apron of Aunt Natasha's. "We will make a quilt to help us always remember home," Anna's mother said. "It will be like having the family in back home Russia dance around us at night." And so it was. Anna's mother invited all the neighborhood ladies. They cut out animals and flowers from the scraps of clothing. Anna kept the needles threaded and handed them to the ladies as they needed them. The border of the quilt was made of Anna's babushka. On Friday nights, Anna's mother would say the prayers that started the Sabbath. The family ate challah and chicken soup. The quilt was the tablecloth. Anna grew up and fell in love with great-grandpa Sasha. To show he wanted to be her husband, he gave Anna a gold coin, a dried flower, and a piece of rock salt, all tied into a linen handkerchief. The gold was for wealth, the flower for love, and the salt so their lives would have flavor. She accepted the hanky, and they were engaged. Under the wedding chuppah, Anna and Sasha promised each other love and understanding. After the wedding, the men and women celebrated separately. When my grandma Carla was born, Anna wrapped her daughter in the quilt to welcome her warmly into the world. Carla was given a gift of gold, flour, salt, and bread. Gold so she would never know poverty, a flour so she would always know love, salt so her life would always have flavor, and bread so that she would never know hunger. Carla learned to keep the Sabbath and to cook and clean and do washing. Married you'll be someday, Anna told Carla, and again the quilt became a wedding chuppah, this time for Carla's wedding to Grandpa George. Men and women celebrated together, but they still did not dance together. In Carla's wedding bouquet were a gold coin, bread, and salt. Carla and George moved to a farm in Michigan, and Great-Grandma Anna came to live with them. The quilt once again wrapped a new little girl, Mary Ellen. Mary Ellen called Anna Lady Grandma. She had grown very old and was sick a lot of the time. The quilt kept her legs warm. On Anna's 98th birthday, the cake was a kulik, a rich cake with raisins and candied fruit in it. When Great-Grandma Anna died, prayers were said to lift her soul to heaven. My mother, Mary Ellen, was now grown up. When Mary Ellen left home, she took the quilt with her. When she became a bride, the quilt became her chuppah. For the first time, friends who were not Jews came to the wedding. My mother wore a suit, but in her bouquet were gold, bread, and salt. The quilt welcomed me, Patricia, into the world. And it was the tablecloth for my first birthday party. At night, I would trace my fingers around the edges of each animal on the quilt before I went to sleep. I told my mother stories about the animals on the quilt. She told me whose sleeve had made the horse, whose apron had made the chicken, whose dress had made the flowers, and whose babushka went around the edge of the quilt. The quilt was a pretend cape when I was in the bull ring, or sometimes a tent in the steaming Amazon jungle. At my wedding, men and women danced together. In my bouquet were gold, bread, and salt, and a sprinkle of wine, so I would always know laughter. 20 years ago, I held Tracy Denise in the quilt for the first time. Someday she, too, will leave home, and she will take the quilt with her.
All of y'all who are in the work, doing the work, let me say this to you. There's no such thing as an ally. Please hear me. There is no, just because somebody declares that they're an ally, the same way that people declare that they're not racist, the same way that they self-declare that they weren't raised like that. You have to put it in context. An ally is a verb. An ally has peoplehood. So let me put it to you this way. The KKK has colors, they have stories, they have rules of admonishment, rules of acceptance, rules around what they're going to bury their dead with, acceptance around cadence, time, meaning around marriage, meaning around role, all that different type of stuff. What does a white ally have? Exactly. That's the difference between culture and strategy. The KKK and all of those horrible groups have culture. They have story, even if the story is bananas and wrong.
I imagine that felt like a big shift from the story to our reading from Resmaa Menakem, and I want you to spot early, talking about culture and tradition. So we've been reading and talking this year about the work of trauma specialist Resmaa Menakem, focusing on his book titled My Grandmother's Hands, Racialized Trauma and the Pathway to Mending Our Hearts and Bodies. He's the speaker we just heard from, talking about the importance of creating culture. This is his exhortation to white people as we do the work of healing our own racialized trauma. He pleads with us to develop an understanding of whiteness without supremacy, to develop a culture of whiteness that is not a white supremacy culture. I can remember decades ago feeling mystified about what white culture was. I learned about other cultures in college, African-American culture, Chicano culture, we called it at my college. And I was encouraged by friends of color to think about the characteristics of European American culture. But it was invisible to me, like trying to describe the air that I breathe. It has been so helpful in recent years to read and learn more about the characteristics of white supremacy culture, which is the dominant culture of the United States. Some of the best known teachings on this topic come from activist Tema Okun, and I'm going to talk for just a few minutes about her work on white supremacy culture. But I need to let you know that she's about to come out with an update to her important work in less than a week, actually. So surely more to come. But I immediately recognized myself in her list of characteristics of white supremacy culture. And these are just a few things from her list: perfectionism, a sense of urgency, quantity over quality, worship of the written word, individualism, the right to comfort, the idea that progress means bigger or more. These characteristics by themselves aren't good or bad, but they are glorified in our culture over other meaningful values, and they are also prized, even though living these values can actually be soul-crushing. I know perfectionists who are miserable, but cannot turn off their perfectionism. That's painful, and our culture will reward perfectionists even as they work themselves to exhaustion. That's one of the ways that white supremacy culture is harmful to all of us, not just Black people, Indigenous people, and people of color. When the pandemic started, many of us recognized right away that there were benefits of slowing down and having less to do. And I want to remind us that not all of us have experienced the pandemic as a time of slowing down and having less to do. But we like not having to drive all over town. We enjoy the simplicity of being able to attend many things from the comfort of our homes. We've been forced this past year to let go of perfectionism, urgency, quantity over quality, even individualism. How many of us have swapped food or groceries with a neighbor or friend because getting to the store is too complicated? How many of us have let go of things we used to think we were supposed to do because we really need to conserve our energy for the most important things, and not everything can be the most important thing? As we look ahead to the changes that will come as more and more people are vaccinated, now is the time to be thoughtful about what exactly we are returning to. We do not have to pick up everything that we set down at the start of the pandemic. Many of us yearned for a slower and simpler life. Remember, Remember that as you start to add activities back in. But Resmaa Menakem is asking us to do more than slow down and simplify. Again, his exhortation to white people as we do the work of healing our own racialized trauma, to develop an understanding of whiteness without supremacy, to develop a culture of whiteness that is not a white supremacy culture. The work for Black people, according to Menakem, is to promote social and cultural healing among African Americans. He has a chapter on this in his book and a list of recommended activities. He's less directive about how white people should go about the work of creating culture for ourselves. But he's clear that it is our work to do, not work we can get Black people to do for us. In talking about culture, he tells us, culture is how our bodies retain and reenact history. Because culture lives in our bodies, it usually outweighs everything cognitive. Change culture and you change lives. You can also change the course of history. When strategy competes with culture, culture wins every time. He continues, culture involves elders, rituals, symbols, uniforms, displays, rules, stories, mentoring, roles, titles, awards, codes of behavior, and a shared history. These can all be deeply soothing to a human body, especially a traumatized body. Still quoting, culture matters deeply to human bodies because culture creates a sense of belonging, and belonging makes our bodies feel safe. More than almost anything else, we humans want to belong. If enough people do the same thing over and over, or if they share something with each other enough times, eventually it becomes culture. Still quoting, social activism is necessary for changing the world in positive ways. If our collective body is to fully heal from the trauma of white body supremacy, we must also create new expressions of culture that call out, reject, and undermine white body supremacy. Call out, reject, and undermine white body supremacy. That must be part of the new culture. And again, still quoting him, because Black Americans, white Americans, and police have each developed their own subcultures. Each group first needs to create profound change within its culture. This means each group needs to develop its own stories, symbols, rituals, role models, elders, and so on. Now, end quote. So when you think about white nationalists in our country, think about that yearning for belonging. There is a culture to white body supremacy that provides a sense of belonging that is not easy to step out of, right? For people to leave that culture behind, there needs to be a new culture to step into, somewhere new to go to provide that sense of belonging and community. As Unitarian Universalists, we have some of the elements that Menakem means when he talks about culture, but he's talking specifically about developing a culture of whiteness without supremacy, something that is healing for white people. Similarly, he encourages Black people to pursue cultural healing. Our UU congregations might hopefully be places where this kind of healing and culture creating can happen. But Menakem is talking about the development of something like anti-racist culture or activist culture. He particularly thinks it should have a catchy name. So while there may be many anti-racist organizations and activist organizations working on developing such a culture, I don't think it exists yet. Excuse me, or we would have heard of it. I do think there is a deep yearning in white people to heal our racialized trauma and to create together a culture of American whiteness that is compassionate and communal. I think the current interest in genealogy and ancestry and DNA analysis is an expression of that yearning. In our story this morning, we heard of a family from Russia and how their traditions evolved here in the United States, but still kept them connected to each other with roots from another country. It's a beautiful story. But many of us white people, perhaps the majority of us, have an immigrant story of feeling forced to leave the traditions of another country behind. This is what white supremacy culture forces all of us to do, to give up our cultural and ethnic traditions in service to white body supremacy. My grandmother came to the United States from Finland, but she taught her children and grandchildren nothing about Finland. As an immigrant, the safest thing for her was to leave as much Finnish culture behind as she could. I similarly know nothing about my Scottish and Norwegian backgrounds. The safest way to preserve culture in the United States is to celebrate lone ethnic holidays with lots of alcohol. And of course, Black people, Indigenous people, and people of color have been forced by white violence to give up their cultural traditions. So there is something potentially healing for all of us in rediscovering and reclaiming our ethnic heritages and in learning our own histories. Menakem has encouraged us throughout his book to learn the true history of the United States, not the whitewashed history. So this is part of the work as well. I imagine many of you have seen the PBS show, Finding Your Roots, hosted by Henry Louis Gates Jr. This is a documentary television series that researches the genealogy of celebrities. Now in its 7th season, its popularity is another sign to me of our yearning to discover more fully our own stories and histories. So let me share with you a wonderful example of the kind of tradition that seems particularly suited for those of us in the United States. This is a tradition we can create for ourselves. This particular tradition comes to us from our congregant Dre Marsh, who's given permission for me to share it. And I'm not sure I remember all exactly how Dre does it, but I'm sharing what jumped out at me as a possibility. So there's a glass jar for each child in the household. And in that jar is a scoop of earth from the birthplace of the child, of each parent, and each grandparent. I'm not sure if they have grandparents, but I think it's a nice idea. So that's 7 scoops of earth, 1 for the person, each of their parents, each grandparent. If parents and grandparents aren't loving figures, then other parental figures, mentor figures could be chosen instead. I think this is a powerful tradition for us as Americans, maybe especially for Californians, where many of us have come here from other places. Just the task of putting together such a jar for myself is an interesting project that will take years to complete. And so as a side note, if any of you are traveling to Finland soon, please let me know. I have a favor to ask. One last thought from Resmaa Menakem. For this new culture to take hold and prosper, there needs to be an emphasis on cooperation and the collective good, as well as the individual and individual achievement. Individualism prized above community is the most dangerous and harmful aspect of white body supremacy, in my opinion. We are hurting ourselves in many ways because of our failure to tend to the flourishing of the collective. Look at our climate crisis. Look at our broken economy. And let me take a moment to remind you, by the way, that the economy was broken before the pandemic started, and the pandemic has only hastened changes that were already coming. For this new culture to take hold and prosper, he writes, there needs to be an emphasis on cooperation and the collective good. May it be so, and may we join in helping create such a new culture. Please join in singing.
We are building a new way. We are building a new way. We are building a new way, feeling stronger every day. We are building a new way. We are working to be free. We are working to be free. We are working to be free. Hate and greed and jealousy. We are working to be free. We can feed our every need. We can feed our every need. We can feed our every need. Start with love, that is the seed. We can feed our every need. Peace and freedom is our cry. Peace and freedom is our cry. I said peace and freedom is our cry. Without these, this world will die. Peace and freedom is our cry.
The Sunday offering is an expression of the generosity that makes our congregational life possible. Today is Social Justice Sunday, when we donate our offering to a local organization that makes a difference in our larger community. Today, we're taking a special collection for Camp de Benneville Pines, the Unitarian Universalist camp in the San Bernardino Mountains. For the past 60 years, the camp has worked to fulfill its mission to be integral to the growth of our UU faith and to be impactful for people, communities, and for the environment. Many of us have been fortunate to spend time at the camp, and I want you to know that de Benneville Pines holds an especially important place in the lives of UU teens and children, many of whom have grown up and are growing up while attending summer and winter camps at de Benneville Pines. Camping at de Benneville Pines is one of the ways that we create culture together. Since the start of the pandemic, the camp has been closed, cutting off the income that makes camp possible. Additionally, the camp has been threatened by wildfire and has repairs to make. So this video request from the camp was filmed a few months ago, but the information and the need is still current.
Hello, everyone. This is Janet James, Director of Camp de Benneville Pines, coming to you from a wintry mountaintop. Thank you for inviting me to speak to you about camp and the financial challenges we are facing. As you drive into camp from Jinx Lake Road, the forest and camp look absolutely perfect. But upon glancing up to the mountain peaks above camp, one sees nothing but charcoal, ash, and burned out trees. Since everything above camp was burned in the El Dorado fire, our initial flood and mud flow mitigation efforts have gone into installing a wall of defensive measures on the hill above camp. 80 volunteers assisted camp employees over 6 different weekends to fill and place 10,000 sandbags. That's a lot of sandbags. We are so grateful for their labor of love. We hired an erosion control company to install 700 bales of straw from one end of camp to the other and erect 1,500 linear feet of silk curtains, all designed to redirect water and mud flow away from our structures. In the photos, you will see the gray K-rails, the double-wide straw wall, and the black silk curtains. To date, we have spent $70,000 on erosion control measures, including geology and surveying costs. The sandbags, straw walls, and silk curtains are all temporary measures. It is estimated that permanent water diversion measures will cost upwards of $500,000. But for now, we are concentrating on immediate priorities. The first priority is to raise enough money to meet monthly fixed costs while we are closed. The second is to raise the $70,000 to cover the costs of the erosion mitigation efforts. Our 2021 fundraising goal will be upwards of $350,000, so the camp can cover its fixed costs for many months to come. Your continued help through special collections and recurring giving will be key to the Benneville's survival going forward. As we move into 2021, Camp's 60th anniversary year, I want to personally thank you for your outpouring of love and financial support thus far, and my deep gratitude for your assistance going forward. Although the challenges seem overwhelming, I know we can meet them together and once again celebrate in community up on the mountaintop. Stay well, everyone.
There are 2 ways to donate. You can make a donation directly to Camp de Benneville Pines. I'll put the link in the chat box, and that way you can be added to their mailing list to get news directly from them. Or if you prefer, you can text your donation to Chalice and we will forward the donations. To indicate that your donation is for this special offering, please text your dollar amount followed by the word justice, because this is a social justice Sunday. And if your Sunday donation is meant to be part of your pledge payment instead, please be sure to indicate pledge after the dollar amount. Please give generously. Please join in dedicating our offering with words of affirmation. May love be the spirit of this church. May the quest for truth be its sacrament and service be its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, and to help one another in fellowship. This is our aspiration.
There is a word spoken softly in the night, an ancient prayer that lets your hope take flight. It moves in you and shakes your being to the core, and once obtained becomes the thing worth living for. And the word is whole. The world feels separated, pieces scattered wide. So many yearning faces searching for what's denied. We all share the longing to find one place where we can feel connected and live lives filled with grace. And the word is home. Let it fill your heart and mind with peace, compassion, a sense of belonging. Stop the longing, the world is hurting, so bring some comfort and hope. Let your spirit rise like little children when we are all called home. It doesn't really matter what size of wound we face, the hate of many nations, one soul that needs embrace. It's where we come together and are intolerant of those who withhold the promise of unconditional love. And the word is love. Let it fill your heart and body with peace, compassion, a sense of belonging. Stop the longing, the world is hurting, so bring some comfort and harmony. Let your spirit rise like little children when we are all called home. There is a word spoken softly in the night, an ancient prayer that lets your hope take flight. It moves in you and shakes your being to the core, and once obtained becomes the thing worth living for. And the word is whole. Let it fill your heart and body with peace, compassion, a sense of belonging. Stop the longing, the world is crying, so bring some comfort and harmony. Let your spirit rise like little children when we are all called home. Let your spirit rise like little children when Sharon is called.
We are starting to face that the United States will not likely reach the herd immunity goal of 75 to 80% of the population being vaccinated. This was reported this past week most prominently in the New York Times by reporter Apurva Mandavili. That article noted that because there are now so many variants of the virus, that at least 80% of people would need to be vaccinated to achieve herd immunity. But polls show that around 30% of adults are reluctant, or what is called vaccine hesitant. Public health messages will increasingly focus on addressing the concerns of those who are hesitant. President Biden announced this week that vaccine goals have been revised, and the hope now is for 70% of adults to have received at least their first dose of vaccine by July 4th. Because many of our older congregants have been vaccinated for quite a while now, and because it's now possible to get vaccinations without an appointment, it can start to feel like everyone's been vaccinated who wants to be vaccinated. So this is my gentle reminder that that's not true, and that it takes time to vaccinate millions and millions of people. I have relatives who just got their first dose yesterday. There is also hope and expectation that vaccines will soon be approved for children as young as 12. And when that happens, the government is prepared to move very quickly with vaccine distribution for that age group. There was an article on the NPR website a few days ago with this headline: "If your brain feels foggy and you're tired all the time, you're not alone." The reporter is Ritu Chatterjee, and the article lifts up that we have been and still are living through a time of stress and trauma and grief, and reiterates the importance of self-care. I would add that although there is a great relief that comes as we get our vaccines, that there's also additional stress now as we have to make decisions and choices about what to do and where to go, what risks we're willing to take when a significant portion of the population is still unvaccinated, and what activities are nourishing to us and important enough to resume quickly. I've seen more people in the past week and done more things. I guess I've seen more people in person in the past week and done more things in the past week outside my house than I have in over a year. It's wonderful, and it's also overwhelming. In visiting with some of you this past week, I heard your relief when I shared that everything was kind of overwhelming right now. And one of the ways that shows up in my life is that I'm short-tempered. Someone said, "Oh, it's not just me." No, it's not just you. Remember that headline: if your brain feels foggy and you're tired all the time, you are not alone. Whenever it is that we feel safe again, that's when we will begin to process our trauma. For some of you, that time might be now already. But I think for most of us, that time is still ahead. We're not there yet. So in the meantime, continue to take good care of yourselves, getting enough sleep if you can, eating well, drinking water, getting some exercise, enjoying simple pleasures, and cultivating a daily spiritual practice. Resmaa Menakem recommends 20 to 40 minutes or more every day. We have come so far together, beloveds, and I'm so grateful for you. Please join in singing.
We are going, heaven knows where we are going, but we know within, and we will get there. Heaven knows how we will get there, but we know
Our closing words come from the Reverend Samuel Trumbore. Go forth in simplicity, find and walk the path that leads to compassion and wisdom, that leads to happiness, peace, and ease. Welcome the stranger and open your heart to a world in need of healing. Be courageous before the forces of hate. Hold and embody a vision of the common good that serves the needs of all people. Amen. You're invited to close our time together by singing The Well, and everyone is invited to coffee hour.